Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for coming. And as we see here, we got a pretty packed room here. My name's Amit Bando. I am the chief economist and senior advisor on just and inclusive economics at Ceres. And of course, Secretary Granholm needs no introduction. Uh, and I would just like to jump in and hopefully,
Jump in.
yeah, have you give us a few thoughts. And sort of a lead in, I would like to talk a little bit about, or have you talk a little bit about the IRA, the recently passed landmark and perhaps one of the most significant efforts in climate change that we've had. So your thoughts on what you think are some critical components of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and what you see are some opportunities for the private sector.
Yeah, well, the private sector, huge opportunities, right? Because of the tax credits, which I think are, we're seeing it already. We're seeing billions of dollars being invested, both from the IRA as well as from the CHIPS Act as well, which incentivizes, of course, building of fabrication facilities for, for microelectronics, particularly for chips. But we've seen $30 billion since the IRA was announced being invested, particularly in, for example, battery, making sure we have the batteries for electric vehicles as well as for long duration storage. There's just been a huge response as a result of that. And of course, we've also seen announced expansions for solar. We are excited about the prospect for both on and offshore wind manufacturing. Woo! But all of that is really exciting. So number one, tax credits being able to, accelerate deployment. Our motto is deploy, deploy, deploy. At the Department of Energy, this is the season of implementation, and so we are all about getting that done, both on the manufacturing side as well as on the deployment of generation. I also think, though, that the IRA is really important for the cost of energy for citizens, for people. I mean, bringing down the price today. There was an article, in fact, about utilities saying that the IRA is really going to reduce costs for people because they're going to pass along the tax credits that they get to lower costs for people on clean energy, which is very exciting. And in addition to that, we're writing the rules for energy efficiency technologies. So particularly, I'm excited about heat pumps and using heat pumps to be able to reduce demand for electricity and create efficiencies, as well as, of course, for the manufacturing side of that. So reducing costs for people, deploying clean energy, manufacturing in the United States, what's not to love?
Great. And so those are some of the critical elements, as you just pointed out. What do you see as some major challenges, if you may, during implementation?
Yeah.
What would you outline?
There's two that are two challenges / opportunities. One is on the workforce side. I mean, we are seeing, of course, supply chain issues, and if you consider workforce to be part of that supply, making sure that we have a real, trained up workforce for the various types of technologies, both the deployment and the manufacturing of them. The great news is that for the IRA, 80%, 75% of the jobs that will be created are jobs that don't require a 4-year college degree, but could be also incentivized through apprenticeships. And part of the IRA really gives a boost to those who would provide apprenticeships for training, et cetera. So I think workforce is one of the areas that I think is a challenge, although an opportunity. The other is, of course, supply chains, other parts of supply chains. So making sure that we have, one of the big challenges is, for example, transformers for the electric grid. We need to build transformers. We need more of them. We need to build them in the United States to be able to, to have a trusted supply chain. And we're not there yet, although the incentives obviously will allow for that supply chain to catch up with the demand for which there will be a huge amount, we're hoping. So it's exciting, but there are some challenges.
And so, just on that issue, as we transition, how do you see the global supply chain filling in? Of course, the goal is to have a secure, stable supply chain. And as we transition, how do we tackle the path?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because we know, in the United States, for example, if you look at batteries for electric vehicles, we know the critical minerals, we know that there have been challenges in the United States with respect to mining, and you can do sustainable mining. We want to be able to do that, but we also know that we have allies who are also in the process of doing that. So while that gets set up, making sure that we can work with our allies to be able to achieve the supply of whether it's lithium or cobalt, et cetera, graphite, we want to make sure that we can access that as we build up the batteries for these electric vehicles. So, the opportunities are there for these. Look at us,
Yeah,
we're attracting. We're irresistible.
There
Is what it
you
is.
go.
So I think that's, the challenges that we have relied so far on supply from countries that may or may not share our values, but that we end up being vulnerable because of over-reliance on one supplier, one country supplier. So if China, for example, is producing 80% of the content for processing of critical minerals for batteries, that makes us vulnerable. And so we want to diversify, and we want to bring that supply home as well, and do, part of today is the 1-year anniversary of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and part of that, yes, and there's so much going on the bipartisan infrastructure law as well, but part of that is to make sure that we have the ability to process, for example, critical minerals in the United States, which we have not, we have not specialized in at all. So, each of these steps is really a way to address those supply chain challenges that could be considered a choke point, and that we want to make ourselves more energy secure so that we can have those supply chains in the U.S.
Great, and you mentioned the law, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the US DOE's Office of Technology Demonstration, the work that you're doing there. And also, do you see a specific role for the private sector, perhaps?
Again, private sector, got to get in the game. They are in the game, but the tax credits are obviously an incentive to do that. But under the bipartisan infrastructure law, a lot of that is grant-based, right? And there's a 50% match. So the United States is plunking to make sure that these key technologies are developed in the United States. So here's an example. We just had recently received concept papers for our hydrogen hubs. And we got 79 concept papers. So those 79 concept papers, this is for $7 billion, right? They reflect about $60 billion worth of ask, and when you combine the private sector investment, it's over $200 billion of demand for these hydrogen, or at least on the private sector side, real incentives to participate in the development of hydrogen. These hubs obviously are a full wraparound strategy, right? You want to make sure that you've got all of the supply. You want to have the supply. You want to have offtake of hydrogen, and so what's really exciting about that is it shows that there is huge hunger on the part of the private sector to play, in addition to the partnerships that are happening on the ground with the public sector, because a lot of public sector entities have been. 49 states were represented in these 79 concept papers, so it's just across the country. Obviously we will not be able to fund all of those with the smaller amount of money that we have, but maybe it sends a signal to Congress that we can expand. But we're going to be evaluating all of these concept papers to make sure that we have offtake, that there's really robust offtake strategies for these hydrogen hubs in addition to the supply chain to make it happen. We know, for example, that these hubs will really address the problem that we have seen with the cost of electrolyzers for electrolyzer-based hydrogen. So we're excited about what we're seeing, and we're excited to see what will emerge. This will be a bit of a stepped-in phase. We also got a very good response for our storage funding opportunity announcements, both recycling as well as other components of the battery side. So the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations expects to be really a world-class project development entity. It's got $25 billion to play with, not play, but to invest. And the people that we are staffing this with are project managers, folks who really know how projects work and how to make them successful. And so we're very excited about what's coming out of that, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, as we hire up. By the way, we continue to hire at the Department of Energy to fulfill the goals of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We've started a Clean Energy Corps. We expect that we will be hiring over the course of the next couple of years about 800 people to be able to do that. So if you know of folks who have expertise in any of the areas that are touched on, whether it is hydrogen, advanced nuclear, obviously long duration storage, we want to make sure that we are carbon capture, sequestration, we want to make sure we're hiring folks who've got some project expertise as well as subject matter expertise.
Now, this is very good to hear. And as a former DOE person myself,
Love it.
I used to work at Argonne National Lab on exactly these kinds of issues. But the fact that you're really able to pinpoint that this cannot happen in isolation. You got to have the technology, you got to have the project management skills, the finance, and the collaboration is very important.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's where you're getting at. And so in addition to doing this, I think we're also talking about or trying to focus on issues related to impacts on communities, those that are historically marginalized or suffer most as a result of some of the impacts of climate change and etc. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that. What are we doing in a way that is deliberate? How are we putting those issues front and center as we deploy, as we scale?
Yeah, this is such an important question. The Biden administration has really put at the center of its climate strategy Justice 40, which is that 40% of the benefits of these investments must go to communities that are either fence line or frontline communities. And how does that work? So in the Inflation Reduction Act, we talk all the time, I think, about structural inequality. And the Inflation Reduction Act tries to insert structural, intentional steering of investments toward communities that have historically been left behind. So the fact that there is a kicker, if you will, for locating a manufacturing facility of clean technology in a disadvantaged community is important. The fact that there is an incentive for apprenticeships is significant. So you can get, in addition to the 30% tax credit, you can get another 10% for locating in a disadvantaged community, another 10% for having apprenticeships. And in addition to that, for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, we are evaluating projects based upon community benefit agreements. So we want to make sure that communities are at the table in ensuring that not only does the community accept, but the community embraces, and there are benefits specifically for the community. So the evaluation, there's 20% of the evaluation based upon how the applicant has taken into account the community in making sure that we are repairing damage for communities that have been left behind or have been at the forefront. I'm curious about this from the investment side, because you are obviously, Ceres has obviously been working with major investors. And from a global perspective, is the investment community viewing the opportunities of clean energy investment? For example, here we are in Africa, and this has been obviously a big subject here. What are the challenges and the opportunities? You mind me flipping the script on you? Here.
Not at all. I
I'm
love it.
curious to hear what, from your perspective, how the investment community is seeing this.
Yeah, that's a question that I think has to be parsed, because the investment community, depending on size, depending on scale, depending on the sector and geography, has different perspectives and different drivers. For the most part, I think we're at a point where investors are not only keenly aware, but are also eager to sort of get into this issue where no transition is going to truly be sustainable unless it's just. That's kind of the way they want to look at it. I say want because everyone recognizes that, but that's where things really become tricky, because how do you measure? How do you benchmark? How do you monitor? Are there comparable ways such that you have metrics where you can, one investor is doing something in one sector, how do you compare that to others and say that this is truly the direction we want to go? I think there's a lot of thinking along those lines there.
It's interesting because I know that from our perspective, the technology has advanced, and so investors, used to be investing in technology solutions, which is super important, but now everybody's looking at investing in geography.
Right.
And so policy becomes such a player in this. We're considering this all the time, too. In the United States, one of our policy challenges has been permitting. For example, in the slowness of getting transmission lines permitted, for example, or how crazy is it that it takes 5 years to get a geothermal plant permitted in the United States when we want to have this clean, dispatchable baseload power. And so policy becomes, I think, a consideration for a lot of investors now, in addition to the technology advances. I'm wondering how that's viewed as well.
Very much so. I think not only policy, but also the fact that you can't look at a project or a program in isolation. You've got to really talk about things in a holistic way. You mentioned transmission lines. One of the key problems or key issues is that you'll have a transmission line, say, going over 400 kilometers from where the power is generated to, say, an urban setting, and all the towers are on land that is, people there don't have electricity. I mean, that's the reality in a lot of the world. And how do you then create something that allows that transmission line, allows for the siting, permitting issues to be taken care of, but also the communities themselves get some benefit? I think that is the challenge. Investors recognize that fair and square, but it's not something that happens overnight. So I think that's really where, as you said, it's a combination of policy, it's a combination of communities being in the game, investors being there, and of course the technology is there and the finance is there. I think the technology and finance are probably not the biggest problems here. It's really the policy, it's really the fact that you got to combine everything, and then once you do something, or once you think of something, how do you implement it and keep implementing at scale? That's really the challenge. So as we talk about this, I wonder if you could speak a little to how you went through the process of incorporating and including these issues in the program as we see it designed and hopefully implemented. Are there some lessons learned that we can share with others and say, here are things that we think you absolutely need to do, and here are some that you might want to avoid?
Are you talking about the Justice 40 components?
Inclusion of the Justice
well,
components.
I mean, we're seeing it play out, right?
Exactly.
So,
that's why I want to sort of provoke some thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the opportunities really has been these community benefit agreements and insisting upon applicants to have them reach out. And it's not just a check off. In other words, you can't just go to a local, environmental justice organization and say, hey, sign off on this. You don't want to just have that brush. You want to really have engagement to make sure that you're thinking through how this will actually benefit the community. And there may be issues that are not just employment in that community, although that's obviously important, but maybe there are investments in the community related to quality of life that are important. So, you know, if you ask me this at this time next year, I will have the answer, but right now we're just getting all of these submissions in the door, and we will have a better sense of it. We do know that because the president has insisted upon this Justice 40, and that we have identified communities specifically through whether it's census tracts, there's a whole tool inside of the U.S. government, number of agencies have developed, and then it's come up to our Council on Environmental Quality. And so there's a tool for disadvantaged communities, there's a tool for communities that are in transition, that may be fossil communities that are also interested in really taking advantage of the next generation of power. We want, having powered the U.S. for the past 100 years, we want them to power the U.S. for the next 100 years, but using clean energy. So we have an intergovernmental workforce on coal and power plant communities, as well as all of the efforts that are happening on Justice 40. Once you identify the places, then it becomes a little bit easier to direct investment in the kinds of things that those places need. In the abstract, it's, you know, Justice 40 is the overarching theme, but it's only when you see these applications and the communities themselves embraced as part of it and part of the application that we will be able to really gauge how effective this effort has become. So it's just a tad early, but we're excited at least about the direction.
Great. And I think, as you mentioned, I think DOE in particular has a long history of this interagency collaboration, collaboration between different layers of communities and governments, and of course the private sector. I think that all of that has to happen. So I'm wondering, is there something that jumped out at you that you didn't expect when you are looking at some of these collaborations and idea sharing?
I would say, I mean, on the plus side is that there are, I mean, you probably remember this. I mean, obviously the U.S. government has a lot of arms. It's a huge octopus. But the fact that not every agency, but almost every agency has something to offer in this clean energy clean energy economy space. So the fact that the Department of Commerce, for example, had a whole Build Back Better challenge that directed investment toward communities that want to participate in this clean energy future was super exciting. That notion of almost all of these agencies, the EPA now has direct grant money and a green bank to be able to invest in these technologies. And so it really allows for cabinet members to come together and be more strategic about where our investments are going to cover the ground. Tom Vilsack has been here, I know. Agriculture obviously has a big part to play in this, so that's a very exciting thing. The surprise has been, honestly, that it is what has always surprised me, and I'm, this is my first time serving in a cabinet in Washington, D.C., so I came from the States, and I am stunned at the work we continuously have to do on clearing out the underbrush of bureaucracy. I'll just say. I mean, it is really quite astonishing to me.
Right?
It's shocking sometimes. And we're just, the president just assigned the Department of Energy to help lead the effort on rebuilding the Puerto Rican grid. And I am quite stunned at how many agencies end up with good intention slowing down the process and figuring out ways to be able to turn that around and have the investments reach where they need to go right away is a challenge.
Great, but it seems like at least you're able to overcome that in a lot of ways as we move forward. Yeah,
Trying
and
for sure.
Okay, and so again, just in the next few minutes that we have left, I'm just wondering if you based on where we are, based on what you see happening, where are some things that you think we still should be focusing on? Because that's where the greatest need is, or perhaps that's where we have the most homework that we
Yeah,
have to
I
do.
think number one, for me, what keeps me up at night is clean, dispatchable baseload power. And so making sure that we have solutions to be able to have long duration energy storage is critical. I'll be talking later today about some of the earth shots that we have launched on the technology breakthroughs that we still need to achieve. This is why the promise of clean hydrogen is exciting. Both as an energy storage, as an energy carrier. We want to make sure that we've got these solutions. It's one of the reasons why I'm encouraged that next generation nuclear is, interesting to many countries, and they see it as well. As we see the geopolitical realignment happening around energy and all of the challenges associated with that, I think that the investments that the U.S. is making, and the investments, of course, that everybody's making across the globe, but because we're doing such a big push on a lot of these next generation technologies, will help the whole world, right? We want to make sure that these technologies are ubiquitous and are democratized across the world. And so the clean dispatchable baseload piece of things, which is why energy storage is so important, is really important. I continue to be mystified as to why we don't see more enhanced geothermal, for example. I'm obsessed a little bit about geothermal and why we don't see more of it, because it's technology that has been around. Same thing with next generation hydropower, even distributed hydropower, that where you can see, and pumped storage related to that is another opportunity that we should be doing a lot more of, in my opinion. So, but excited that we have the opportunity to showcase some of this in the U.S. and in partnership with our allies. We've been very fortunate to be part of the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation and a whole range of other international partnerships that are focused on these solutions as well. I can tell you that every one of my counterparts, ministers of energy across the globe, are super interested in clean hydrogen. And so the clean hydrogen question and how we can make sure that we can prove that out and make it and lower the cost in particular is going to be really key. But I'm excited to see what's happening on the horizon and in the present in the United States. Keep watching this space, because you'll see a lot of good news coming, I think, out of the Department of Energy over the next few months.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you so much, and appreciate it.
thanks for sharing everything with us.